And the brain hacks that we've had so far: self-esteem, waste of time; FOMO, waste of time; making something more beautiful in your life endlessly available to you. Don't be zero sum in your thinking. Increase your tolerance for discomfort, which is coming next. So there's some brain hacks already. It's a perspective to zoom out and not catastrophize whatever happens going forward. Couple thoughts, please.
I was having difficulty understanding why self-esteem was on the, we don't want to get into dopamine cycle side, because I've always viewed self-esteem as like, a very good thing that helps you succeed in life, like, confidence and self-acceptance. And can you explain a little
Yeah,
bit about how you're viewing self-esteem in this role?
absolutely. And that conversation is very triggering for a lot of people. So I'm glad you pulled me back to that. So I think self-esteem, it depends on if it's externally referential or internally referential. If it's internal, to me, it's good. It's about contentment or a fulfillment rather. So it's creative. I feel good about myself creatively, but it's inside. I'm not sharing that with anybody. Or it's self-efficacy, which is I have the ability to adapt and I feel peaceful, joyful. Those definitions, if you define that as self-esteem, then I say that's a higher brain kind of self-esteem. It's the lower brain self-esteem that's the problem. And when you're concerned about a rank, and the way you know that is how much embarrassment you can tolerate, how much failure you can tolerate, how much rejection you can tolerate, how much dependency you can tolerate, how much help you can get from others and give them credit for that help publicly even. I think those are tests of your lower brain self-esteem and how much the rank matters until you get to Christ, the meek shall inherit the earth, where you're like, I just don't care anymore. Like, and then you're like, lower brain self-esteem out of the way. But for the vast majority of human beings, 99%, especially the ones, the saying from Christ that easier to thread a camel through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get to heaven. The idea is that once you're hooked on the external dopamine of wealth and power, you lose the ability to tolerate the dopamine drop. And so you become more narrow. You keep going to the same well for happiness, but it doesn't work. So I know a lot of wealthy people that are just miserable human beings because their lives have become really narrow. So and I know examples of self-esteem where they do have confidence, and then it's an athlete or it's a really well-performing student, and then they get to college and they get their butt kicked and they become suicidal, right? Or they get to medical residency and they commit suicide because they're used to winning and now they're losing. So they're hooked on the self-esteem of I'm really good, I'm really smart, I'm a really good athlete. And then suddenly that narrative starts to get destabilized and they go downhill. So, for example, and I've made every mistake in parenting you can imagine, and I learned about it afterwards. I have a 30-year-old and a 25-year-old, and I was yeah, good job, on the side, and that turns out to be a mistake to validate outcomes because they get hooked on external self-esteem. And then my son started, 30-year-old, who's a therapist now, a really good athlete, started self-sabotaging because he didn't want the pain. He had this, and he could have been a varsity as a freshman. And he was like, nope, I'm good here. I don't want that drop. And so he's like, nope, not. So that's the problem with external self-esteem is it leads to self-sabotage. It leads to psychological destabilization. It leads to feedback intolerance. So yes, they have some confidence so they can take some hits, but if it's too much of a hit, they become completely destabilized and they just, boom, shut down. So that's why we can't focus on validation externally. Thank you for the question. That's a tough one to wrap our heads around. So what we're gonna do next and try to power through this before lunch. Let's do this. We'll do a little. We did that already. Another couple of brain hacks. We've already talked about non-zero sum, but here's a zero sum that really matters. And this is another profound concept to reinforce the lower brain, higher brain dynamic, is that you have two superpowers, okay? And in contrast to the lower brain, you have that, which is about 5 neural networks. There's about 5 higher brain neural networks that you can expand at will with 2 superpowers. There's only a limited amount of blood that's going into your brain in any moment. It can either go higher or lower, and your thoughts control where the blood goes. That's a superpower. You can control being higher brain at will. Now, if it's a real vulnerability, a real Achilles heel based on your psychological history, and I can rattle off all of my vulnerabilities, there's a lot of them, which is why I had to learn all these things. You can get pulled down to lower pretty aggressively, and you pull yourself up and you go right back down. You pull yourself up, you go right back down. So it can be a real wrestling match, but you do have the ability to, in infinite capacity, to shift and drive blood flow higher. And the other is neuroplasticity, which you know all about now. And so as you cause higher brain neural networks to expand over time, they automatically pull the blood up and keep it up. Those are 2 superpowers that we have. And it has profound implications given what I'll show you on the next slide. So neuroplasticity, blood flow control. And so this is a zero-sum game that matters in the brain. And the lower brain has some wicked powers. It has the dopamine pop. It's going to entice you. Oh, that's a great idea. We should do that. Or that's a great way of thinking. Or that's a great outcome. A raise or going to a restaurant or whatever it is. We instantly become addicted to that outcome because the dopamine stamp is placed on it. And then the dopamine drop. We're basically puppets on strings of lower brain dopamine strings of self-esteem and FOMO. Okay, until you cut the strings with awareness. And this is happening subconsciously, which is the scary part. So it's like alien versus predator, right? Predator is invisible. You got to see the creature's footprints and to be aware of where this creature is in order to deal with it. Same thing with the lower brain. And that's what we're going to do next is to bring the lower brain into awareness in order to get more mastery over it. So we're going to set up a gymnasium now. And you're going to do reps, discomfort reps. Don't worry about these categories right now, but the more reps of discomfort we do in the form of awareness and talking about these things, the more you're going to build a part of your brain that causes internal psychological safety and then external psychological safety, where we become more and more comfortable being aware of lower and higher in order to shift higher. So it's almost like you have to take 2 steps back because the lower brain hates awareness of the lower brain. It's like reverse narcissism. The lower brain does not want any awareness of itself because it represents an existential threat to the genes. That's why we hate discomfort. So we're going to flip the script on that, take 2 steps back in order to take 4 steps forward. And so the brain hacks or brain tools, I'll get there, and action plans, which are combinations of tools, can make the discomfort much more bearable, and you can put in reps faster. And then as a community, we can put in reps even faster. So to me, work and life, which is blocked off there, to me, the real purpose of work and life is actually becoming higher brain dominant, using it as a gymnasium to become higher brain dominant. Everything else happens automatically because your feedback tolerance goes so high. The meek shall inherit the earth. You start becoming so creatively powerful and relationship powerful, things just unfold more rapidly and smoothly. So if we do this as a community, even more powerful. And then the implications of lower brain versus higher brain are profound. It's everything that matters to you is predicted by how higher brain dominant you are. So take a moment, and this should be in your handout, by the way, I think. Yeah. So take a moment to just contemplate this list, because besides the discomfort tolerance that leads to the promised land of better processes, better relationships, better neural networks, there's also the promised land of just being higher brain dominant by itself, which leads to those other 3 things. So ponder this list for a second to recognize how profoundly important it is to be, and you don't have to put a ton of time into this, by the way, just being motivated to be aware is all you have to do. Moment to moment, you'll keep shifting, and becoming more and more higher brain dominant. You don't have to devote a bunch of time. In the nooks and crannies of the day, you can probably come up with 2 hours of time to expand these neural networks. So take a moment to look at that list, think about it. And then we're going to start activating the gym. Activate gym. And by the way, this is because it drives the blood away from the higher brain. And the lower brain also can release cortisol, the stress hormone. That hormone severs synaptic connections of the higher brain. So the lower brain has some real wicked powers. The higher brain, you have the ability to pull the blood up there and cause neuroplasticity to appear here, and has all kinds of happiness and functional implications of being higher brain dominant. So this is because of blood flow diversion and cortisol. This is, and neuroplasticity. This is awareness and neuroplasticity and blood flow control, if you can drive it up. Okay. So what we're going to do, we'll skip this for now. All right, so here we go. This is what we're going to do together, is just 4 steps to become in command of your lower brain. And you're going to start practicing in pairs or threes. Pairs is ideal, a little bit more efficient probably to be in pairs if you can. And so these are all brain hacks, but this is a process for becoming what I call courageous scientists. Some have heard of the concept, mindfulness. Mindfulness to me doesn't work if you don't have command over your self-esteem system and your FOMO system. The lower brain's too sophisticated. So mindfulness is equivocal and the evidence is equivocal in terms of its impact. If you are humble, I think mindfulness can work. If you are traumatized, little t and big T, it's going to have a hard time working. So we're going to do 4 steps, and the slides that are coming up next are the 4 steps. And I'm going to have you start journaling now before you break off into pairs. So step number 1, and this is in your handout, is this. And by the way, every time you do this is the point I was making about every moment that you're just aware and shifting, your more dendrites are being connected in 3 parts of your brain: the orbital prefrontal cortex, which is the storytelling machinery, which drives our brain's functioning and our dopamine assignments; the medial prefrontal cortex, which is a feeling awareness of the lower brain; and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is a intellectual awareness of your lower brain. You can see the signals, the signs, like predator, the creature predator, and you can see the signs that lower brain is activated right now. You may not acknowledge them because you may be emotionally shut down, which I was for the first 40 of my 57 years. And so you may not activate this, but you cannot hide from this in terms of being lower brain self-aware. So if you're traumatized, you may shut off the emotions, but if you're willing to be humble, you can still be aware of the lower brain and it'll still flash signs all over the place. So first brain hack and step that you're going to take, there's more, okay, is this. I want you to come up with, this is all the category, these are all the types of discomfort there are, except I don't have physical discomfort on here. It's emotional, which to me is chaos. It's just lower brains activated, whether it's our own or other people's, our own or other people, including those that we triggered. That's emotional discomfort. Creative or intellectual discomfort is, ideas. It's a battle over ideas and the risk of feeling dumb, right? Or somebody else feeling like they're smarter, and the shame that's connected to that. And then to me, the most intense discomfort is performance discomfort. It's like the measure, competition or coaching or measurements of how well you're doing at any skill you can think of are in this category. I want you to come up with one scenario, just ponder it for a minute and write down the scenario that you find triggering. And you're going to be sharing that along with the next 3 steps. Okay, so take a minute to just ponder this, come up with a scenario that you find lower brain triggering. You'll find pretty quickly that we all go lower brain all the time. And if we normalize this process of lower brain awareness as a community, it's really powerful. So please. Okay, so this may be that, someone's, was blunt towards me or was critical of something I did. And so that may just trigger me or ask me to do something. And it's like, oh man, I got to spend this, the conversation I have with my wife all the time, which is chores. Like, oh, I want to do Leo. Why do I have to do chores? I'm like a child sometimes, when I get triggered. So that's, you get triggered or you give feedback to a student and they're like, you don't, this is BS, and they just storm off. Like, so you triggered them, right? Or, you put an idea out there in a group meeting and someone is just, it's amazing how easy it is to trigger our lower brains. And someone is just a little bit insensitive in the way they kind of reject your idea, and it's very triggering. Or even it gets scarier and scarier as you go down. You need to reject somebody else's idea. Yeah, Bob, I don't think we should go in that direction because of X, Y, and Z, and that just shuts them down, right? So, or it can be, an example of, someone helped you. Like I have a physician colleague who was very lower brain and difficult, but very brilliant. And I think he was must have been on the spectrum and as well. So difficult, but brilliant. And he gave me some feedback. And over time, I learned to take the feedback better from him and he improved my practice. And I gave him credit for that. That's when I knew I had better command over my lower brain because I could swallow my pride and give him public credit for helping me, even though the way he delivers it is so mean and so condescending. And that's my Achilles heel is meanness, because I grew up with a family of a lot of ridicule and meanness and a lot of self-esteem issues. So meanness kind of triggers me and I want to fire back. So that's that. And then, in terms of, feedback of how well you're doing, measuring how well you're doing, it can be teaching, it can be leadership, it can be, are you asking for coaching? Are you asking for feedback on performance with some metrics? And then getting feedback when it's not asked for, like, that's also very destabilizing. So those are a few examples, if that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. All right. So take a minute to come up with your scenario. And then we're going to go to the next step of your preparation. And by the way, these are all barbells. Okay. These are all barbells we're lifting now. Now we're starting to build a higher brain. This is the gymnasium happening right now, right before our eyes. Anybody need some more perspective, or how are we doing? Everyone got a scenario? All right. Next step 2 of the gym. And by the way, you can repeat this process forever and you'll keep expanding your higher brain. Just this alone, this 4-step process over and over again, you will notice changes happening. Okay. Step 2, signs that I am lower brain. Speaking of, I'm sorry, what's your name? You mentioned the higher brain versus Derek. Okay. Thank you, Derek. So to Derek's point, nobody is aware of lower brain. It's remarkable. Why? Because it's too scary from a existential perspective. It represents too much risk of loss of status, loss of tribe, loss of opportunity, all the above. So these are the 7 signs, from my perspective, of lower brain activation. Loss of energy. So you may not have negative emotions because you're too self-protected from little t and big T trauma. So you shut that part of your brain off, but you will experience this. You will experience this, a feeling of defensiveness or counterattacking that just happens almost automatically. Foggy thinking, relationship tension. So the people that we are in partnership with, they're our mirror of what's actually happening here that we're not even aware of because of the way they're reacting to us. Body signs, faster breathing, faster heart rate, flushing, tightening of muscle groups, sweating. All these things are signs that your lower brain is activated and the sympathetic system is going up. And then self-soothing behaviors of any kind that you're using to tamp down the lower brain. Okay, so it's an indirect sign that you got a little bit lower brain activated and jacked up. In your scenario, I want you to think about, how did your lower brain show up? And remember, we all go lower brain all the time. So it's not a big deal. We all have unique signatures of lower brain activation, though. So try to overcome the shame part of us to be honest about signs of lower brain activation at the risk of triggering you too much. So trigger warning, as they say, right? So think about your sign of lower brain activation, and we're going to reframe that discomfort as we're now building the higher brain, because acknowledging it actually is the higher brain that's acknowledging it. So the more you do this, the more you build your higher brain. I'm going to say that over and over again. So embrace the feeling because of the payoff. Feel free to ask any questions about this list. And again, the purpose of this is you trick yourself out of the lower brain by accepting the lower brain, because it's the higher brain that's doing the analysis. And you come up with a plan in the future for that particular trigger. The next time it shows up, you're going to have a different neural network to channel to. So you're going to plan for that trigger in the future with a new neural network. And if you ignore this stuff, the lower brain will keep spinning and doing damage to your body, your brain, your relationships, and your reputation. You cannot hide when you're a lower brain. It's impossible. So there's a lot of damage. So we want to face it. So Jack Nicholson doesn't yell at us. Yes, I can handle the truth. Okay. Step 3. What's the narrative that your lower brain is telling? Just this is clunky in the beginning, okay? But it becomes easier and easier to do. So hang in there. The next step is, what dopamine narrative is your lower brain telling in this instance? Is it a loss of status, offended? Is it a loss of pleasure or opportunity? You got hooked on this great experience, and like Gina's, flight getting messed up yesterday. She doesn't get to be here. I'm sorry, because Gina is the reason I'm here, and then Casey. So hence the recording, which is good because you'll have access to the recording as well. But it can be painful to be excited about something and then have it taken away. So that's dopamine dropping and saying, "You fool, we have to get that back. I gave you a dopamine prepayment and now we don't have this thing. And now I'm going to make you suffer for it." And then anxiety is fear of the unknown, basically. It's like the Wizard of Oz who has 2 dopamine strings, O and C, saying, "Oh no, the future, we're worried about the future," fear of the unknown. But ultimately behind that curtain is simply the loss of self-esteem and loss of pleasure and opportunity. But you now know there's infinite sum neural networks, process maps, social networks. We have infinite access to happiness. That's unlimited. Like you were saying, I'm sorry, what's your name? Rachel. The point of, even if you're in great suffering, but if you're together as a community of higher brain people, you're going to be mostly joyful despite that, and you'll be able to be more adaptable, and you don't have to worry as much about the future because you have a different approach to the moment. So, and then finally, hungry, irritated, tired. Hangry is a thing. There's a study out of University of Ohio. 80% of fights that occur with couples are from hypoglycemia. So that's my excuse almost always. I'm sorry, I reacted that way. I think I was hungry. Or this one is my go-to. It's like, "Sorry, dear, I think we have a new rule. We can't have difficult conversations after 7 o'clock," which is actually true. We have that rule. And my daughter also uses that against us. So it's after 7. Who let you into this agreement? But when the battery is depleted at the end of the day, these higher brain networks that shut off the lower brain start to get depleted. And so the lower brain is coming out to play. So do not have difficult conversations if you're tired or already lower brain activated. So in your scenario, what's the narrative that you think is being told by the lower brain? This is another way to be a detective of your lower brain and trick yourself out of it, being a detective of your lower brain and accepting that discomfort. Okay, take a moment there. Okay, last step. Sorry, I'm rushing for the sake of getting you to lunch at somewhat decent time. And we agree that we can probably go 10 minutes into the lunch. It's a buffet, so then we'll power through the buffet and come back. I'm sorry I have to leave at 1:45. I have to work my other job. My colleague was nice enough to cover for me, but I have to go back to Milwaukee to work. So these are then okay. So here's the trigger. I know that I'm lower brain. I think I have a good sense of what the narrative is that my lower brain is telling. What brain hack do you use to go from higher to low or lower to higher in your scenario? You all have brain hacks or brain tools already, but they fit into different categories. And this categorization can help you to organize what you already have in order to have it come up faster and help you. So that's the power of this organization, let alone all the brain hacks that we teach over time. We're mostly focused on this box today, but you'll recognize some of these. And these are different parts of the brain: left prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate, left prefrontal plus hippocampus, front to back, and global, and the whole higher brain, social, theory of mind, and empathy networks. So these are all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 higher brain networks that you can activate at will and build over time. And so what brain hack did you use? And it's okay if you didn't use any and you just stayed lower brain until it fizzled out. That's fine too, for the future. But what brain hack did you use to flip from lower to higher in that scenario? Do you recognize it on here somewhere? In addition to some of the ones that we've already talked about, these are all the ones that we've hit so far. Okay, so in your scenario, and get ready to share your scenario, maybe 2-3 minutes with each other. Talk through your 4 steps with your scenario. Give you a minute to think about a brain hack that you might have used to flip back from lower to higher. That's a lot, I realize. This is kind of an overwhelming list. But I also wanted to help you realize that these are different parts of the brain, and you're doing a lot of this already. Just want to help you organize it better so it's more useful for you. Now you have your 4 steps slide, and this is clunky. Don't worry about it. It's awkward at first, but go through the 4 steps with each other in pairs if you can. Singles on a table might have to join a single on another table to make it pairs. It'll be a little bit more efficient. So maybe 3 minutes each practicing going through your 4 steps with each other, taking turns, okay?